Wheat has been known through the ages as the staff of life, but now many people say they're gluten intolerant and have stopped eating bread or other wheat products. Has something changed in our stomachs or in our heads? Next on The Truth About Wheat. Hello, I'm Ken Root, an agricultural news reporter many years removed from my home state of Oklahoma. I have fond memories of wheat harvest and especially the foods made from it. My mother's deep dish apple pie and homemade rolls come to mind. Today, the place of wheat-based products in our diet is being challenged by advocates for a gluten-free menu. There are also claims that many people have celiac disease, which is said to make them intolerant of traditional wheat foods. Is that true, or is gluten-free a fad diet hype? We hope to answer those questions in an informative discussion with experts, beginning with Dr. Brett Carver, Regents Professor of Wheat Genetics and Chair in the Division of Agriculture at Oklahoma State University. Dr. Julie Miller-Jones, Board-Certified Nutrition Licensed Specialist and Nutritionist, and current Distinguished Scholar and Professor Emeritus of Nutrition at St. Catherine University in St. Paul, Minnesota. And Sarah Olson, Colorado wheat farmer, mother, and Colorado Wheat Administrative Council board member. Well, welcome to all of you.
Thanks, Ken.
Let's begin, Dr. Jones, with you, and probably a basic question. What is gluten?
Well, gluten is one of the main proteins in wheat, and it's actually a really magical protein because it can trap the air bubbles to give the wonderful texture that we know of fresh baked rolls that you talked about. So,
what about celiac disease? What is it, and what % of our society actually has it?
well, celiac disease is what we call an autoimmune disease, and that means that you carry the gene for it. About 1% of the population has it, and for people who have it, they must never, ever eat anything containing gluten. And that's a really hard diet, from soy sauce to Worcestershire sauce, and it's not just eliminating bread. And if you have it, what it does is it destroys the finger-like projections that are on the intestine. So the intestine becomes completely flat, and that means it's really hard to absorb nutrients. The diet is hard, the diet is expensive, costing an average of 242% more.
Wow.
And it really, in order to have a good diet and be gluten-free, you need the help of a health professional, particularly a registered dietitian.
Celiac disease, is it triggered by something, or is it something that onsets at a certain time of your life?
It used to happen mostly in childhood, because before we had vaccines, you and I lived in an era when people got the measles and the mumps. Now we have vaccines for that. Because you have to carry the gene, you have to have some sort of really stressful trigger. That usually was a physiological stress, a virus, something like the measles. It can be an extreme psychological stress as well. But you can get it you have to be eating wheat, and you can get it any time from the time you're eating wheat, which may be 3 or 4 months old, up to 102. So but you don't necessarily get it just by eating wheat. You have to have that stressor that triggers it.
Is celiac, if you look at it epidemiologically, increasing in society?
It is. Studies from, we think it's about doubled at least. We know from Finland and Sweden it's doubled. We know that studies at the Mayo Clinic where Dr. Joe Murray, as a gastroenterologist, he looked at Korean War recruit blood and Afghan War recruit blood,
right,
and showed that the presence of the antibodies were much greater in the Afghan War recruits.
But it's still just what %?
It's 1% of the population who has celiac disease. 0.5% of the population is allergic to wheat. So the 1% who has celiac can't eat wheat, And gluten is also in barley and rye, and maybe in oats because of cross-contamination. So they usually can't eat those 4 grains unless they eat what's known as purity oats.
Right.
So, and 0.5%, so 1.5% should be avoiding wheat. There's a new kid on the block called non-celiac gluten sensitivity. It's argued about how many people have it. The gastroenterologists think if it exists, and there's an argument, if it exists, it's 3 to 4% of the population.
Dr. Carver, let me turn to you from your perspective as a wheat breeder. How much have we changed wheat from the wheat of 100 years ago to the plants that you breed today?
Today, fundamentally, the plant that we see it has changed very little in the last 100 years. The genetic makeup certainly is the same as it was 100 years ago. Now, there are the obvious visual differences that people can see, and that is the plant is a little bit shorter today than it was 100 years ago, and the plant today can produce more kernels, and therefore the yield will be higher. But again, the genetic constitution of that plant is the same. The genetic constitution changes as you go farther back in history. And those changes occurred as a result of, as anything else in a biological world, through evolution and domestication. In fact, if you look at the changes since in the last 100 years versus the changes that occurred in the last 10,000, these changes today are minuscule, absolutely minuscule. The genome, of course, has remained stable, but the genome has undergone changes in terms of the chromosomes, in terms of the genes and mutations in the genes over the course of 10,000 years. In fact, that is the kind of variation that has fueled the breeding efforts today.
Now, many of our grains, corn, soybeans come to mind, have been genetically modified. Has wheat?
Absolutely not. There is no commercial production of genetically modified wheat. Not to insinuate that genetic modification has a negative consequence in these other crops, but in wheat, there is no commercially produced GM wheat.
And wheat, as I see it, is always grown as a food grain. Our first goal with wheat is for people to consume it, which does give it, in some ways, a higher classification than other grains.
It's what enamors me the most about breeding this plant, because I know it's something that's going to be directly consumed by the human population. And it puts a little bit higher level of responsibility on me and anybody else who is breeding this plant to make sure that it is consumable.
Okay. Sarah Olson from Colorado, welcome.
Thank you.
You and I are the non-PhDs at the table. But I am curious, you're a wheat farmer, you're a mother, you're a teacher, and I wonder, from the profession of being a wheat farmer, how you feel about Americans not holding you in as high esteem as once if they think that the product you're producing is one that could cause them problems in the diet, and even food activists vilifying your product.
Right. It's very frustrating to me because, you know, my great-grandparents immigrated from Denmark over 100 years ago and came to Colorado and started a wheat farm because wheat is well adapted to that area of the country, and grew our farm, and of course my grandfather ran it, my dad, and now I, and hopefully my child and my nephews. And it's a source of such pride to have that legacy, and we really take care of our land. It's our business, it's our home, it's our family, and like Dr. Carver, I love that we grow something that people eat. And I take that wheat and I take it home and mill it in my home mill and make bread for my daughter and myself. And for people to misunderstand that it's not still a healthy plant and that we take such good care of that crop, it's very frustrating, and I think we need to talk more about how it's grown, because I think there are a lot of misconceptions.
Well, we're saying that the wheat plant and potentially the wheat has changed, but I want to look at our diet and whether we've changed. And Dr. Jones, what has happened to our diet over the years? I mean, clearly I can look at my own girth and tell that obesity is more of a problem, and it seems to be more in our society, but are we more obese? Are we eating more total calories than we did in years past?
Tragically, we're more overweight and obese. 2/3 of the U.S. population are either overweight or obese, and this is problematic. Now, how did we get there? It's a twofold deal. One, we are eating 600 more calories, according to USDA disappearance data, than we ate in 1970.
Per day.
Per day. Now, that's disappearance data, so you didn't necessarily drink all of the drink that was there or whatever. And all food groups have increased. So when people say it's the wheat that made you fat, well, if you look at the chart, you'll see that the fats and oils have increased, the meat has increased. The only thing that hasn't increased is what I want people to eat more of, and that's fruits and vegetables. We're not eating more of that. So, and the two-pronged piece of that is we do far less exercise than we did in 1970. We don't even stand up and go turn on the TV set or turn it off or change the channel. Right. All of those things use some calories. So we're moving less, we're eating more, our portion sizes often are what should feed 4 people, not a single person.
Well, is the availability of cheap food or fast food and a disconnect on healthy eating really the cause of our health problems?
Well, I would argue that you could even go to a fast food store and buy that kind of food. I don't necessarily do that a lot if you make the right choices. And because it's about portions, it's about choices. So you can buy a salad at most fast food places. You can buy the smallest burger, not the supersize Jagunda burger, so that you have a choice. So that, and you don't need the 69-cent big slurp that has 800 calories and gives you no nutrition except for calories. Those are the pitfalls. We make bad choices and unfortunately we make those choices, and so the various concerns offer those choices. We should, if we were asking for apple slices, they'd give us apple slices.
Well, I think it's interesting that we're now focusing on, obesity here is a big problem of ours, whereas the goal of plant breeding has been to feed the world, and I'm sure we're going to get into that a little bit more. But if you look at wheat breeding and the changes in the wheat plant that you and your colleagues have made, does the change that you've made in that wheat plant have any effect on our diet, on our public?
I don't believe so. First of all, I think and most of my colleagues would agree with this statement, wheat breeding as it occurs today is probably the most natural form of plant breeding on Earth. And so we're not introducing anything new to the plant that would be considered of harm to us. We're simply utilizing the variation that's already present in wheat and its relatives for that matter. And that's what makes it so natural. So much of the wheat breeding that we do involves bringing in those ancient relatives to utilize the important traits that they can offer, say for disease resistance or for drought tolerance. We're constantly bringing that genetics into the forefront of modern wheat. So I don't think there's anything that we had to be
And Brett,
concerned.
aren't you using over 6,000 varieties from all over the world to do this?
Oh, more than that.
More than 6,000.
Wow.
The more the better. And these are the hidden reserves that we utilize to fuel further advances.
However, you are breeding it to make a better product for the consumer or for the milling, and Sarah is producing it in larger quantity at this point. But then we take that product and we're refining it a lot more than it used to be. Is refining of our food products an issue in our diet?
I'm not opposed to the refining of grain, but what I pray and wish and plead and implore, I would like people to make, as the dietary guidelines and the USDA My Plate suggest, make half your grains whole. The average American eats less than 1 serving of whole grain a day, And 40% of Americans never knowingly choose a whole grain product. And I say knowingly because they eat popcorn at the movie by the bucketful, and that's a whole grain. And so I'm a proponent of popcorn, but maybe not by the bucketful. So it's not the refining, it's the choices. And so if you made half your grains whole, that means you can use some white flour and some whole grain flour to make a loaf of bread that you'd like to eat. So it's the choices we make. If we ate whole grain flour, we would get more fiber in our diet. And only 4% of the entire US population meets the fiber requirement. And if you're a man between 14 and 50, under 1% of you do. So this is a real problem, and it creates cancer risk, it creates heart disease risks, it creates diabetes risks, so we need to make better choices.
And that fiber potential that's in our modern wheat varieties today is no different than the fiber potential that would have been present 100 years ago or more.
I want to take it another way, and that's the psychology of all of this. You know, we have a lot of information exchanged. We definitely have the internet, which provides us with an unfiltered amount of information from bloggers today who come up with an idea. And there seems to be nothing more powerful than one human suggestion to another human and a testimonial about a product. So I know people who say, I stopped eating wheat bread products and I just feel better now.
And I lost so much weight.
Right.
And well, if you stop eating wheat in your diet, generally it's a third to the fourth of the calories. So if you actually really cut it out, you've just cut a big chunk of calories. And you also have to look at, they say they feel better. Well, first of all, just doing something for your health often makes you feel better. And they may have stopped eating what I call the doodles, donuts, and ding dong diet, and they're now eating green peppers. They're eating really the kinds of things that we've been requesting them to eat, much more healthful choices and much more reasoned portions. And so they're feeling better because they're doing something for themselves. And there's sort of the cycle, you know, when Dumbo had the feather, he thought he could fly. So there's really a placebo effect of, you know, I'm eating better, so I do feel better.
And then they spread that to other people.
That's right.
Who try it as well.
Right. And the other thing is we want to have lost the weight yesterday. And so we're willing to glom on to some of these ideas that in your rational mind don't even make any sense. But we think, okay, they promised me I'll lose weight, and I'm so desperate that I'll try it.
And we as Americans, you know, we love a fad diet. If it wasn't low fat, it was, you know, low carb or gluten-free. And you know, my friends are always trying some new diet. And goodness, if my mom and grandma weren't right, you just really need a balanced, wholesome diet, including many variety of foods and smaller portions and common sense when eating. And that's what I hope I impart on my daughter, and it is hard to make those good decisions.
To get you to appreciate that you're not the only segment of American agriculture that's been beaten up. I, several years ago, covered a lady who went on the Richard Simmons show back when he had credibility in the 1980s, and she said that she and her sister were on a diet of 4.5 pounds of roast beef each per day, and nothing else, and that they didn't lose any weight.
Surprise, surprise.
And that she felt awful. And I said, what did you do? And she said, well, I got off that, and I started eating fruits and vegetables and all kinds of things like that, and I feel so much better, so the beef is killing me.
Right.
And I have a feeling we're having the same situation here, that the wheat is what's taking me out. And so I asked a meat scientist at that time to look at what she was eating, and he said, no one in their right mind would eat only one thing. And he said, you need 3 gallons of water a day minimum just to keep your body cleansed of all the byproducts you're building up from that. So I'm a little frustrated, Dr. Jones, that people will try these extreme fad diets and leave out things in their diet. So let me ask you about gluten. Leaving out gluten in your diet, is there a danger in eliminating gluten from your diet?
Well, you can, as I mentioned earlier, if you have celiac disease or allergy, then you must leave out gluten. But that's a really hard diet to do and do well. It's particularly problematic in two fronts, and one is fiber, and the other is folic acid. So people who must do it can, but people who needn't do it, it's really problematic because our enriched flour is mandated by law to contain folic acid. The Centers for Disease Control called the fortification of flour with folic acid one of the 10 most important public health measures of the entire last century, because what we did by the mandatory fortification of flour was to reduce birth defects caused by, like spina bifida and neural tube defect. We decreased that by 48% since 1988. That's amazing. And folic acid is so critical that we put it in the food supply rather than recommending a supplement, because the neural tube during fetal development occurs in the first 2 weeks after conception. So it's your folic acid status at conception that matters. And so even if you started taking folic acid after you know you're pregnant, it's too late because that neural tube has already formed. So the U.S. Public Health Service and the CDC decided that they would fortify bread because most everybody ate it, and therefore women of childbearing age would have the folic acid that they need. And if you're a family who's had a child with a birth defect, you know how really heart-wrenching that is. From a public health issue in terms of special schools, in terms of healthcare costs, it's also really problematic to have spina bifida and other kinds of birth defects. So to have a public health measure as simple as adding bread to enriched flour is just a wonderful advance.
There are some food activists right now who are saying that wheat is a chronic poison. How do you respond to that?
Well, and they're also saying it's addictive. And people just say things because it's trendy to bash the wheat farmer, it's trendy to bash the big food companies. There's just absolutely no truth to that. And it's certainly not addictive. And the same study that is quoted by the authors to say that wheat is addictive was, first of all, it was done in a test tube. It wasn't done with humans or even animals. It was done with a test tube. And they took this piece from the test tube and interacted it with an opioid receptor that had been extracted from the brain of an experimental animal. So there's a pretty far leap there to say that humans are addicted to wheat. And in that same experiment, they showed that this happened with wheat. It also showed that it happened with spinach. And everybody I know is addicted to spinach.
Sarah, I want to show you a chart that is a drop in flour use, which means a drop in wheat consumption. So you as a farmer, do you see that you have a role in stepping up and defending your products?
Right, so in the United States, about 50% of our wheat is exported, but 50% stays within our country for domestic consumption. And flour use continues to drop in this country, and any market that we're losing is detrimental to wheat farmers. And I hate to see that because I know it's such a nutritious food that's part of our good diets. We don't want to just feed the rest of the world. We want to feed America as well.
So you would say that what you're doing is the right thing, and you need to defend what you're doing.
Yeah, I think
public.
us farmers, we kind of like to get out in the field, and be by ourselves, and we're used to working on our own and not having to be an advocate for our industry. And I think there's a lot of younger people coming into farming, very educated people, and I think they're starting to realize that we can be open with the people, that consume our food, and we don't have anything to hide from them. And to really promote what we do, it's a fascinating industry that so many people are removed from now because very few people farm in the United States.
Dr. Garvin, let me turn to you. I mean, people are saying we're going to have 1 billion more people on this planet, and your job is to help be able to feed those people, and yet you're getting a criticism of the crop that you're trying to improve. How do you feel about that?
It's an attack that we don't need. It's an attack that distracts from the real job. And the real job is, you're right, we have to feed a growing population. And the only way we're going to do that is to make the wheat plant better and more productive. I know as a practicing plant breeder, the wheat plant is under attack, but it's under attack from the things I'm used to thinking about, like pests, insects, and diseases. There are diseases in the world, other parts of the world, that could absolutely take our crop out. And very rapidly. Those are the problems that I need to address. I don't need to address the attacks that come from those who are consuming or are critical of it for no scientific reason.
Right. Dr. Jones, last question to you, and that is the school lunch program. Are we requiring a level of wheat or of food products that are healthy within our school lunches?
The new guidelines for school lunches do use the USDA MyPlate, and they require that any of the grain foods used by the schools must have 51% whole grain in them, so that the pizzas, the breads, the cookies, all must adhere to make half your grains whole. And so, yes, it's a USDA program, and they believe the nutrition science that wheat is healthy and should be in diets of people.
Well, I think we can stop on that one. There's a lot more that we could talk about, but all the time that we have. So many thanks to our guests for their insight into an issue that continues to gain public attention and is becoming a greater part of our conversation. If you want more detailed information about wheat and a healthy diet, visit this website, wheatfoods.org. Until we meet again, I'm Ken Root, and this has been The Truth About Wheat.